A new Australian-New Zealand co-production is releasing in cinemas on the 16th of February, a film called We Are Still Here, a series of interlocking stories with Indigenous themes. And it's my great pleasure to be speaking to the director, the montage director and the director of one of the sequences in the film, Beck Cole. Beck, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Thank you so much for having me.
I still have very fond memories of your film, Here I Am, which goes back a few years, but what a powerful film that was.
I know, and how funny that this one is We Are Still Here. Like, that's an interesting choice of a second title, totally by accident also.
I was going to say there's a theme emerging, but okay.
Yeah.
Now, We Are Still Here is a really fascinating collection of stories and ideas and themes and so on. How did it all come about?
Well, what happened was it was coming up to the 250th anniversary of Cook circumnavigating this part of the world. And Penny Smallacombe, who was heading up the Indigenous department at Screen Australia a couple of years back, she's no longer there now, but she was always really keen to do a co-production with New Zealand, like Film New Zealand. And so they cooked up this sort of opportunity to get some filmmakers together to make a work together. And then as it sort of developed, it really obviously shifted away from the Cook sort of aspect and became much more about First Nations voices and the impact of colonisation over a long period of time and into the future.
How very interesting, and the stories are so diverse. How much involvement did you have in the writing processes in terms of all the stories, or was that all done independently?
No, we had a number of workshops. So people were asked to submit an idea. And I was someone who submitted an idea along with Sam Painter, who him and I ended up scrapping both our ideas and doing something together. And I think there are a number of the filmmakers sort of had a similar experience. They went in with one idea, and then after some group discussions about what the film could be, because we really had no idea what it was at the beginning, what it could become, a lot of people's sort of ideas sort of altered a bit, especially mine. But it was, yeah, so I kind of guess I was quite involved in the sort of, the structure of my chapter at least, yeah.
Okay, well, let's talk about your chapter and then we'll talk about the rest of the film, Grog Shop, which is a really interesting story and how prescient it is to some extent with what's happening in Alice Springs at the moment.
Yeah, it's well, Alice is my hometown, and that Grog Shop where we shot is literally at the corner of my street. So it's, it's something that is a very familiar story and definitely something that's sort of all over the news at the moment, which I think is a good thing. I think things that are big issues need to be discussed. So, yeah, we just wanted to, I think in the grand scheme of the film, I recognised fairly early on that we needed a bit of, light and shade and darkness and just a bit of smiles and a few laughs as well, because just the nature of this sort of storytelling can be quite heavy hitting, So I wanted to bring something that spoke about, had a bit of a social impact as well as a bit of light and shade. Yeah, it's hard to talk about because you don't want to give it away.
No, we don't want any spoilers because it went in a direction that I didn't expect. But and that's great. That's terrific. So, was that a long shoot in terms of shooting in Alice Springs, etc.?
No, it was fast and furious. I think we were in and out within 2.5 days or something, because it was actually a really operating grog shop. So it's not easy to get permission to film in a space like that in Alice. Like there's literally, there's police that guard the shop 24/7 kind of thing. So it was, we were a little bit sneaky, to be honest, about what our intentions were. Like we kind of sort of said, oh, look, it's a comedy, sort of pitched it as something, well, which it is, but pitched it a little bit not entirely truthfully. But, I've been making films in Alice Springs for a long time, and sometimes you have to tell a bit of a yarn to get what you want in a town like that. It's a pretty, what should I say, a pretty, frontline kind of environment, older Alice. it's an interesting old town. Yes.
It sounds like it is. Tell me about your
Yeah.
cast. How did you find them? They're really so good.
Yeah. Well, I was really keen to work with Megan Wilding, who plays the character of Ruby in my chapter. I've been a huge fan of hers. I think she's just comedy gold, and also she looks so much like a lot of my family in Alice. Like a lot of my family are very fair skin, red hair and freckly. So I was just like, that feels true to my own Aboriginal family at least. And of course, Clarence is one of the best actors I think that we have in Australia at the moment, of course. And the cop is actually a guy called Dan Humphreys, who was a friend that I've made down here in Melbourne. And it was really interesting, actually, because casting cops is really hard. Like, particularly, you don't want to go too macho, and you're kind of looking for something that's a little bit goes against the cliches, I think, particularly when you're representing police in Alice Springs, which are either really young fellas or older gentlemen, so it's kind of people that are in their middle age sort of age range kind of have already left town. So I wanted to sort of speak truthfully about that. Not that Dan's an elderly guy, but he's certainly in his 40s.
Okay. And that just leads me to ask that question. Are there many female police officers in Alice Springs?
There are a few. I think across the board, Alice is a really transient kind of community. So people come and go quite a lot. Like, I think most people are lucky to be there for more than sort of 3 year stretches. It's ebbs and flows as a town and a population. Yeah.
Okay. Now, with you're also what's called the montage director, which I gather means that you put all the scenes together and decided how to do the cutting from one scene to the next and all that sort of thing. Tell me about that process, because there's such disparate stories.
Yeah, it was a really fascinating process, and one that I really enjoyed. Probably one of the highlights of my career to date, actually, was working with the editor. Literally, I'm sitting at my kitchen table right now, and this is where I cut via Zoom, because Roland, it was all throughout COVID, of course, and Roland Galwar, the editor, was actually in Sydney. So he just set up like a little edit suite, and I was able to access the screen similarly to what we're doing now. But yeah, we just spent so much time. We both got quite obsessed by, I mean, there's a million ways to skin a cat, particularly when you're cutting in and out of the segments like we do. So there was kind of a bit of a 2-pronged approach. A lot of it was getting the trust of the other directors to sort of work on their films as well, because some segments needed a bit of a chop and some moments needed a bit of breath to fit in with the overall body of work. So it was a delicate job, and one that we spent about maybe 4 or 5 months doing. So we had some test screenings, which were absolutely very, very helpful, in that people were able to say, where the film felt like it might have gotten a little bit slow or things like that. So we were very open to feedback as well. But we were just wanting to keep the energy going and we were kind of going for keeping the spirit of the stories alive and sort of leaving a story at a pivotal moment where you're leaving the audience wanting more, so you could intercept to the next chapter. It was a lot of negotiation, a lot of discussion, and a really big task. But I'm really happy with the result.
I think it's great. It flows so well, and I was just so intrigued by all the stories, and I was also impressed. Is it rotoscoping or whatever that was used for the the ongoing sequence of the 2 women, etc.? It found that fascinating.
Yeah, that was so beautiful. Well, that's Danielle McLean's film. We called that one Lured, and I think early in the piece, as a group, the whole group, we decided that Lured would be the story that spoke globally for First Nations people across the world, basically. So once we kind of made that decision collectively, Lured then became the backbone. So that gave me some sort of structure to work around in terms of where to place the other chapters. So yeah, I just think that's such a beautiful, beautiful piece of work. Every time it comes on, particularly on the big screen, it just blows me away. It's gorgeous.
It is terrific. It looks great. And again, the stories, they traverse everything from the 1860s to 2274, which is wonderful. And of course, there are Australian and New Zealand First Nation stories. again, the
Yeah.
writing, the concept behind just developing these ideas, I was very impressed, and your involvement in that.
Yeah, well, it was, I think it was interesting because a number of the filmmakers, there's also a team from Samoa, and that happens to be the Gallipoli story. So that's a Samoan team that made that film. So there's various sort of level of experience amongst the filmmakers as well. And I think you can maybe see that sometimes some of the work might be a little bit more naive than others in terms of glossiness or whatever. But I just think it gives it a real, I don't know, charm and beauty. I just think it's such a unique project that so many individual artists can come together and really have really deeply focused on one sort of theme. And yeah, it was, I think they took a lot of kindness and generosity from within the group of filmmakers as well. Yeah, which I think makes it really special.
And the title, "We Are Still Here," is so reflective of what's the common theme of the films. Of course, we are here, we are still here, and don't ignore us.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It was a lot of negotiation too, trying to find the right title. But because we have so many different languages, I think something that I think's interesting about Australia, not versus New Zealand, but against New Zealand, is that they have one language across their whole island, and of course we originally had 250, if not more, here, and a number of our films already come from different language groups. So there was a bit of, in our hearts of hearts, we would like to have maybe had a title that wasn't English per se, but I think it's a really beautiful and poetic kind of statement that truly does, for me at least, represent what the film's trying to say. So I'm happy we got there in the end to that title.
Absolutely. No, as I said, it all works extremely well. Now, I think, did the film open the Sydney Film Festival?
Yes, it opened Sydney, and then we had a screening in Melbourne. Then we trotted off to New York, and where did it also? Toronto. Yeah, and so now we're doing our Australian release, which is really nerve-wracking and exciting. So, yeah.
Tell me about the reactions you're getting, both locally, Sydney or whatever, and also overseas. I'd be very interested to hear.
It was amazing, actually. In Toronto, the first screening it was a really large theatre. So it was maybe a quarter full. And it was a late screening too. It was like one of those 10:30 ones. So I was quite surprised that many people had turned up, but, I'd never actually been to Toronto Film Festival before. So I didn't know how to really gauge what sort of audiences went to what kind of films. But then the second screening we had, it was like the audience had doubled, and then the next one. So it felt like the film was gaining momentum and people were talking about it, which is what you want, for any of your work. But particularly, I think, of a film of this nature, which is kind of, a bit genre bending or whatever. So, I think internationally it's been really beautifully received. And I think after the Sydney opening night, everyone was just so warm, and people are obviously being polite and kind because you've just opened your film, but I think genuinely people were really supportive of what the film had to say and appreciated it as a piece of cinema, which is just fabulous. I mean, I was so proud of everyone collectively after that screening. It was just like, because it was hard yakky, it wasn't all rainbows and lollipops. There are a couple of argy-bargies along the way, but that's what you want and need when you're dealing with a lot of creative people too, so yeah, it was like, sigh of relief, and also, okay, I think this film's going to find an audience, whoever it is, or whoever they are, which is good.
That's terrific. And all the filmmakers very happy now with the end result?
Oh, yeah, I think everyone's absolutely, thrilled. I mean, I'm sure there's a few people that, they've handed their work over to another director to kind of work on. So a lot of people would just really had to stand back and see it in the bigger picture. And I think across the board, like, honestly, I think all the directors were just so generous, because it would be a difficult thing for me to do, to hand my work over to someone and say, edit it and cut it up and make it, intercept it here and there. So I think, yeah, it's a great example of just a really kind-spirited kind of project as well.
Oh, look, that is excellent. And I suppose the another issue, of course, is getting distribution. And I mean, it's great to make films, but they need to be seen. And so, was that an issue at all?
Well, David Jelsey was one of the EPs from the Go Get, so he has supported the film through Dark Matter, and Rialto's is like the international distributor. So I don't think it was too difficult. It's not really my area of expertise, though. I'm just a dopey director, but I think it's great. I mean, I'm really pleased with sort of the plan that they have for the Australian and New Zealand release, at least. So I think it's a generous sort of size and a realistic kind of plan.
And I think your film, or this film, We Are Still Here, reflects the idea that we should have more Australian-based stories, more First Nation stories, rather than putting money into overseas productions. I mean, New Zealand, fair enough, but in terms of Hollywood productions or whatever. So I gather you would be very strongly supportive of increasing financing and coverage of Australian cinema.
Oh, definitely, most definitely. I mean, I think we've just got so many stories to tell, and I think it's lovely. I think this is a great example of First Nations people telling their own stories, because a lot of the time we're still handing over our stories to other people as well, and that just doesn't seem to change. So it's good to sort of, get the power back in that regard. And I mean, I think we've got a history, at least for the last 15 years, really strongly of being able to tell really good stories and really good films, and we can draw big audiences too, So, yeah, I mean, I think our industry is just going from strength to strength, really. So I think it's a really exciting time to be a filmmaker, and really exciting time for the country, to celebrate our cinema.
I'm very pleased to hear that. Beck, you've been involved in a number of productions. You have a really interesting filmography. You directed an episode of Redfern Now and so much else. How do you decide what projects you get involved with?
Yeah, for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been doing a lot of commercial TV directing, just because I wanted to see whether I could do it and to get my speed up and to challenge myself. But I've certainly really enjoyed going back to, filmmaking, feature filmmaking, and more sort of independent kind of work. But I'm also really interested in the documentary genre, and want to sort of put a lot of my time over in that area, which is sort of my first true love, really. So, but yeah, I do all sorts of stuff, from kids animations through to, commercial TV to docos to, yeah, but I've been doing this for a long time, this is the only job I've ever had. So you'd hope I'd have a few sort of runs on my board by now. No spring chicken.
Absolutely. No, congratulations on that. It's not always an easy industry to work in, so you're doing well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah, I managed to get by. It's like any art form. I think there's highs and lows and feast and famines, but yeah, I enjoy, being involved with sort of seeing younger filmmakers come up through the ranks too. And I think there's a lot of work that we still have to do to particularly get sort of more Aboriginal women back in the roles of directing, because the few of us that are around are all kind of in our late 30s or 40s now. We need the 20-year-olds. So I'm forever banging on about, come on, where are they? Chop, chop, let's go. Come over here.
And how do you find the contrast between directing a film and directing television? Because, of course, you've also directed episodes of Wentworth. So it's interesting to compare how the directing process operates.
Yeah, well, the TV directing's super fast. A lot of the casting decisions are made by the producers or already made before you come on. You literally operate a bit like a gun for hire, and that can be really thrilling. So you come in and you're sort of laser focused on working with the actors and the cinematographers and the stunts. So I've really enjoyed Wentworth. I think I've done 4 or 5 seasons of Wentworth now, but I really loved it for the huge, amazing female cast, as well as the opportunity to work in stunts, because I'd never really had an opportunity to do that before. So I enjoy it because you're always learning new sort of skills, like constantly, and there's always so many scary things coming up. So it's terrifying, but it's also really exciting. But I'm certainly sort of coming back to my roots and wanting to get back into sort of good old independent Indigenous filmmaking.
Oh, excellent! All power to you. So, Beck, are you working on a new project at the moment?
I'm actually about to go on the Foxtel's new show called High Country, which I can't say too much about, but that's another big TV series. And then I'm just writing my next feature, and I've got a couple of balls in the air at the moment. But yeah, just one more big TV series, and then I'll sort of think I'll walk away for a little bit. But yeah, I'm enjoying it.
Okay. Well, I hope High Country goes well. That sounds great. And just to conclude, Beck, I must ask you: have you seen any films of late or television programs that have impressed you?
Oh, goodness. That's a very, very interesting question. What have I seen of late? I'm actually really enjoying the new American Horror series. A lot of the stuff that I've been watching is really horror and sort of schlocky, which I love. But I haven't. What have I last seen? Oh, I saw The Drover's Wife. Actually, it's probably the last film I saw at the cinema, which I absolutely loved. Um, yeah, so whenever there's an Australian film, I'm there to support it. So, you know, there's a couple of things about to be released too. So I think it's an exciting time to get out and go see a movie.
That is great to hear. We've been speaking to Beck Cole, who is the director, the montage director of We Are Still Here, and directed one of the segments, Grog Shop. Beck, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye-bye.
Ta-da.